Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, the podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, Agile experts, including professional Scrum trainers and other industry thought leaders, share their stories and experiences. We also explore hot topics in our space with thought-provoking, challenging, energetic discussions. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm Patricia Kong, your guest host for today. I've been invited to participate in a really cool conversation. I'm really excited about this topic. So, personally, as an Asian American and somebody who's worked with Asians in Western countries and in Asia, I know firsthand how silence can mean different things depending on where you come from. So in Chinese culture, for an existence, and I think in many Asian cultures, it's a sign of respect, harmony, deference, deep thought, maybe even strategic. Growing up, it was about obedience. So there's a lot of different aspects of that, just to kind of frame how I think about this. But still for me and a lot of probably our listeners, when we work together in teams, especially in an agile way, where experiences like conflict are really necessary for us to excel, right? When we're working in complex situations, figuring out what silence means is tricky. It's not easy. And I think that that's a topic really worth exploring. So that's why today I'm really excited to talk with Elaine Lin Hering, who's a new friend. We just established that. She's the author of a book called Unlearning Silence. And Ravi, who is an old friend. He's also a professional Scrum trainer and founder of Org Whispers. And we're going to talk about how cultural norms shape our voices at work, where individuals can feel like they're not heard. How can they explore that? But also from the perspective I think about for leaders, people who are leading, how can they recognize that and what they can do to make sure every voice matters. I think I stole that from you, Elaine. You care about making sure every voice matters. Anyways, hello. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So Elaine's background, I want to start here first because you're not necessarily a Scrum Agile person. Your background is actually in mediation and in law. So how did you get from that to being on a podcast about Scrum and Agile, talking with two professional troublemakers, and where we're talking about your book, Unlearning Silence?
Yeah, because you're in law school and you realize that the actual practice of law is maybe deadening to your soul.
Oh,
And even though your Asian mother's really proud that you're at Harvard Law School, and you also realize that the thing people don't teach you in law school or maybe in engineering classes or whatever it is communication. How do we actually work together? How do we transmit thoughts to one another and actually receive them? And as you mentioned, when there's conflict, what do we do about it? Now, the legal system is one escalation of that. But the question I started to answer was, other than sue each other and blow each other up, what can we do? Because it turns out there's a whole lot. And that meant that I fell into this world apparently called leadership development of how do we help professionals, leaders, develop the skills necessary to actually work together. Because I can't cure cancer. I can't lead a Scrum team. I can't program anything for the life of me. But I do know quite a bit about the interpersonal dynamics that get in the way of any of that good work. So I'm delighted to be here with you troublemakers.
thank you. Speaking of troublemaker, so Ravi, I think what Elaine just set it up beautifully, right? Because we all think in that way. You can lead Scrum teams, you can program, but how do we communicate? And I remember just talking to Ken Schwaber, obviously, and it's like, well, we know how we'll do it. We'll set up a process that will tell us what we should do at every step. And there's even a step where we have to reflect and talk about what we can do to improve and get better. But thank you, actually, Ravi, for bringing Elaine on the podcast. How did you guys get connected? You always bring us some fun things.
So I was driving and I was listening to NPR, and one of my favorite programs is Think by Chris Boyd. I think that's where Elaine was, and it's just my lucky day. I was listening to Elaine, and it really moved me, and her voice spoke to me. And then later on, uh, just coincidentally, we happened to join the same networking group. And then I made a request if she would be willing to share her wisdom with our community because I found so many parallels. And we had a very unfortunate first experience where we got Zoom bombed. So I asked Elaine to speak at my meetup. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. So hopefully that won't happen here. But anyway, that's how we went from a car drive to Think, Chris Boyd.
So let's get into the book. Thank you again for sending me a copy. I really dove into it right away. And that being said, you start off this introduction, you're really talking about all these things that you've experienced. You told us about your background in mediation and law. What got you into deciding to write it down into words?
Because it was a way of getting an idea out in the world.
Yeah, because it's not easy. Like as a fellow author,
it's not easy. I
question
my judgment.
Book to tell you to stop being quiet. Open your mouth. You decided to do that.
Well, and what's interesting about it is, right, in the Scrum values, there is courage, there is openness, there's commitment, all these ideals that when you talk about them, people are like, yeah, that makes sense. How do you operationalize? Operationalizing that is actually incredibly difficult given human nature and human behavior. And so as I was writing this book, there's a lot of nuance to it because unlearning silence doesn't mean just speak up, even though we say willingness to speak up about issues, right? It's not that easy. And our best shot at actually being able to bring these values to life is understanding what gets in the way. Because for too long, it's been misdiagnosed as if you don't have courage or you're not open, then you need to get some more courage, get it on aisle 12 at the grocery store, maybe on sale, and then you'll be good to go and the world will work. Versus maybe it's a misdiagnosis that it's not actually that you lack courage, but there's this thing called silence that many of us have learned. It means different things to us. It undermines our ability to trust one another, to work with another. And so what we really need to do is understand the role silence is playing on our teams and choose an intentional relationship with it. So we're not unintentionally silencing each other when really I'm like, no, Patricia, I care what you think. Why won't you tell me? We're in a retro. This is the purpose of this meeting. Just speak up.
I love that. And I think it's so, as professionals, we're always like, oh, we'll just learn it. We'll just learn it. We'll figure it out along the way. Even as individuals, we'll figure it out. And I think you're calling out just some more tips. And I love this because the book kind of sets up the scene about what you just said. And then you give in the second half, you give some frameworks and some ways for people to start taking steps. But I have to ask this first because your silence is so big. So, and I want to know this from both of you. And this is the most abstract question I think I've ever asked, but how do you define silence? And I'm going to ask Ravi first because Elaine wrote the book. I want to know what you think.
I think I define silence as some part of my body tightening up and telling me something is getting suppressed. Making either a conscious or unconscious decision that what I have to offer cannot be offered. That's how I would interpret silence.
Hey, Elaine?
Ravi's done my job for me. So I feel like he's done the mic drop. I would put a finer point to say silence is the absence of voice. And it happens so subtly that you don't even realize it's happening. So Ravi has this gut feeling in his stomach. I want to offer it, but I don't feel like I can. And then we tell ourselves, it's okay. not a big deal. We brush it off, right? I'm used to sucking it up or dealing with it or pushing through. And over time, what our bodies do to deal with the cognitive and physical dissonance is we tell ourselves it's okay, it doesn't matter that much. And in doing so, we're discounting our thoughts, our insights, our expertise, discounting our own voice. And it's not just problematic for me, it's problematic for the people on my team. It's problematic for my Scrum Master because they don't have accurate data on which to make sound decisions because I haven't told them the thing that I've noticed that might be off or that I have questions about because it felt too risky or that's not what we do here. Right, Patricia, you started us off with culture. Culture isn't just where you came from, it's what culture are we building on this team? Are we building a culture on this team where we talk about things, where we ask questions, even if it might slow us down in the short term? Or are we building a culture of silence where I'm just going to do as I'm told? And you know what? There's a process. We'll button it up. We'll move it on. I can point the finger at someone else, and at least I'll get paid.
I love this notion of developing awareness around that because when I was thinking about silence, I don't know if it's just some really deep scars that I have, and it's not just my upbringing, but also in the teams that I've worked at. But I think about silence as the opposite of noise. And so you can really have this culture of noise where it's like, and I think about it as a spectrum, like there's noise from this person just can't help being chatty and they talk and like there's not, there's noises and voice to the other end of like, I just wish I said something,
Yeah.
And that can have many different dimensions, but there's something, and you go into this in the book, but it's like you're not talking just to talk. You're not voicing you're not voicing your opinion just to get your voice heard, which honestly some cultures and I want to say professional environments, they kind of say, oh, who's talking the most, who's participating, right?
Yeah.
And they do that to impress people. So I want to talk about a little bit about the risk of misinterpretation because we were just diving in there. So how do you think about
Before we go there,
okay,
let me clarify because I love this visual that you've given us of the opposite of voice is not noise. The opposite of silence isn't noise. The opposite of silence is voice, and it's a spectrum. And I'd argue that voice isn't just the words we say or don't say, voice is how we move through the world. So voice is also, I'm on that team. Someone pinged me again, and I'm really triggered because I just think they're so out of their mind and don't understand any of the context. Do I fire back a message right then? Or do I pause and choose a response? Right? That act of choice in the moment of how I'm going to react or respond is also an expression of voice. If voice is how we move through the world, that's part of creating a culture on a team is what are the collective behaviors of how we work together. And so I love that distinction between noise and voice because unlearning silence doesn't mean saying everything all the time to everyone. The world is far too noisy and complex for that. But it is choosing with intentionality how you're going to show up, how you're going to work, how you're going to lead. And the trap is that we forget that we have a choice because we're so used to the rhythms of, yep, this is just how a Scrum team works. This is just what work is. I just have to grin and bear it. Versus I might have agency to impact and change or experiment with the way that I train, with the way that I lead, with the way that I work, with when I send my messages or how I send my messages.
Yeah, I said, as I was listening, Lynn, what I got was voice is choice. And me making choice for myself as opposed to the circumstance or the system making the choice for me.
Yeah. Now I'm going to put Ravi in charge of my marketing.
That was a choice. I think it's also I love that it's about choice because it's not always just about the vocalness of it. It's also saying you have an option to say I changed my mind.
Yes.
And so the three of us, we facilitate to different degrees, different environments, but we've probably always seen the situation of we're trying to get to that outcome, whatever that is, and then all of a sudden next time somebody changes their mind, right?
Yeah.
And if you can use your voice effectively, that's great. as a facilitator, you can also look to see what did I do to make sure that everybody participated in a meaningful way. That's also an excellent thing to think about. I'm really trying hard to not plug this, but I was thinking about, but Ravi kind of opened it. So I think that people can use their voice. It'd be interesting to see what you guys think about this in a different way. And I want to see, have you guys seen an expression of that where a group of people or a person has kind of worked around the system to express themselves, not undermining, not undercutting, but to just express themselves? Have you seen any of that?
I mean, what I have seen is, and I have done, is if I'm in a system and I feel my voice is not being heard through the established norms and processes, and I don't want to be subversive, sometimes there is a microcosm of that system where I go and choose to be part of a subsystem where my voice is honored, or I just go leave the system because that's a very heavy price I paid. That it internalizes, that suffering will be internalized. Actually, it's like the laws of conservation of energy. Suffering will neither be created nor destroyed. It will be transferred from one person to another. So if I choose to stay in a system where my voice and choice are not enabled, I'm going to take it to my family and the people who love me the most. So the two ways I've worked around the system is find a microcosm inside that big system, or go find or create another system.
And now that kind of touches on back chatting, right? So in our very present day, you were talking about messaging, Elaine. So there was the back chats, there's all those, but the ultimate back chat that kind of talks to what Ravi is, and I'm sorry, this is what I wanted to stick in, is that in ancient China, women were not allowed to express themselves. It was for the men. The men could go to school, they could talk, they could do all these things. Women were made to stay. They created their own writing system. This has passed down from generations in ancient China, and it's like the ultimate back chat. And it's so interesting because it was there that they could find their sense of community. They could find their sense of safety. They weren't even allowed to learn how to read and write. So they created their own system. And so that's really cool to think about how voice can be used in that way.
Totally. And to me, it's, are you choosing your relationship with the pre-existing systems rather than assuming that that's it and that you need to, so much of this is women, I've literally gotten the feedback, you need to be more man-like because you need to fit into the pre-existing norms within a system. Systems are not net neutral, right? Systems reward certain voices and silence others. We see this in the return to office question, right? All policies have impacts. Who does return to office serve? The people who are used to leading, working in person, who have shorter commutes. Who does it silence? The people who benefit from flexibility, usually have more caregiving responsibilities, longer commutes, right? No policy is neutral. What we can choose, as Ravi's saying, is our relationship with the system. Right? If I am aware of the impact that it's having, am I staying within it? Am I fighting within the system to change it? Am I choosing to exit the system? Am I choosing to do a subcategory, create my own language? Patricia, as you're saying, to me, it's a call to action for leaders within the system, which is to say, what choices are you leaving your people? And in my book, I quote Albert Hirschman, this is the economist from the 1970s, of you've got three choices: exit, voice, or loyalty. Right? What choices are you giving the people on your team? If voice, the expression of what you see, bringing your insights, your expertise, is not an option, then the only two options remaining are exit or loyalty. Exit meaning leave the system, take your talents elsewhere, go work for someone else, build your own language or system. And the people who can have the privileges that Ravi, you mentioned, they might do that. Have the skill sets, have the network, are going to exit, go work for someone else where conditions are better. And what you're left with as a leader is just loyalty. which might feel good in the short term because there's less friction, but loyalty leads to groupthink. Loyalty leads to the echo chamber. Loyalty leads to the issues not surfacing until it's too late and actually creates more problems in the long term. So the question I would be asking as a leader, whether you are a formal leader or just someone trying to lead and influence from within, is what choices am I giving the people around me? Exit, voice, or loyalty? Because I'm pretty sure what we're looking for here is voice.
Mhm.
It's interesting, I think, especially relevant right now in terms of so many things, but I think a lot of people are wondering what's going on with their jobs in the economy, or
Completely.
choose AI or whatever this is, and goals and what is the goal of the company, the strategy, and Scrum and Agile, it's really a community-based movement. That's all. It just started. It's like for us, there's some pages that describe process, and there was so much, like, you were doing a great job talking about the values and all these things that have different layers. So of course, when we knew we were going to have you on the podcast, I asked, hey, any questions that we think that would be great to toss around to, or just some things to explore. And Ravi, you said several. I think that I would say they were almost kind of on this level of the cost of silence and how you
Mhm.
deal with that. That's how I framed it for myself. Um, do you want to kind of go through some of those thoughts about what does it mean when you're silent in a community driven whatever, and there are common goals, and what are those three options that Elaine just mentioned? And
Yeah,
responsibility, you had that very layered in there, responsibility and accountability in your questions too.
yeah, I think, I was just listening to Elaine's book, and there's a section about reactive decision making and reflective decision making. And I'll tie it back to your question, Patricia, but what I remembered was 26 years, almost 27 years in the tech industry, and there are biases in our tech industry, and the bias is reactive decision making.
Mm.
And it reminds me of something I learned from my life coach. So it's the be, know, do, get level. So let's start with getting. So let's say I'm an executive in a software product development company, stock price is not good. I'm I'm not getting the stock price and my bonus and promotion, right? So what do? I start thinking, what do I need to do different? Okay, let me introduce Scrum, Agile, Gen AI, the buzzword. Then even that's not working. What do I do? The next layer is, what do I need to know? Especially in our industry, we are certification junkies. Okay, let me go get new certification. Let me go attend a workshop. But the problem is in the last fundamental layer, who am I being? You can change everything at the other three layers, but if the substrata, the bedrock of who I'm being is not changed, you're going to get the same results. So what listening to Elaine's book and the reactive reflective, that tension reminded me, is very often in Scrum, the name of the game is transparency. And if you don't have high quality information, you won't get high quality decisions. And the bedrock of transparency is voice. And if there's silence, the whole damn architecture is unstable. And as I look back at the older version of me, maybe not that old, even a recent version, 1 year ago, I remember getting cranky with people in training. Hey, why don't you speak up? I remember getting cranky with people in facilitating retrospectives. Why won't you speak up? I get cranky. Hey, why did nobody bring this up in sprint planning? Or I remember getting frustrated with a scrum master in a consulting engagement. Why can't you just speak up to your boss? Why are you telling me all these issues? And then I listened to Elaine's book and I realized, oh, I have so many layers of privilege, and it's a complex equation in so many variables that influences the calculus. Should I speak and risk personal retribution? Uh, or should I be silent and maybe protect myself and my salary? So speaking, as Elaine points out, is more for the good of the community, the product, and but the retribution is likely individual. So that's what came to my mind, and which is why I wanted Elaine to be on this podcast and share her perspective.
Hmm. And there's so many, obviously this is a shorter podcast. I could talk to you both for much longer. And you have a lot of great, there's a technique you have in the book, and it's like every chapter has reflections. And so there's good things that for those who are interested, just explore that from an individual perspective. One that I loved was, what parts of yourself might you be silencing currently? That actually made me think of Ravi, because I think he's probably asked me that before. And how do you even know if you're silencing yourself? But Ravi's kind of dipped into the next part, which is you have some awareness and you start to take some action. And so your book is structured that way. When would you say, how can someone start to think about a couple things? Because we've said, okay, we're exploring this art of unsilencing ourselves. But in that, there's a power in knowing when silence is the right choice. I mean, how do you explore that? How do you start to understand that in more than, hey, when you're facilitating, shut your mouth, count to 10, let people think, right? Be open. But when is from negotiation? When should you be intentional about allowing there to be silence?
Yeah. For people who like citations, this is chapter 3 in the book, which is titled When Silence Makes Sense. Again, silence has many different impacts. And actually, the difference between silence that is additive or strategic, right? Allowing other people time to think, allowing different voices to come forward because we have different processing times, or silence that is damaging or oppressive is agency. Are you choosing it? Take it from a really practical perspective. We're all wired differently, right? So if voice is an expression of who we are, we're going to have different voices. We know that logically. How are we wired differently? One of the primary ways that we're wired differently is there are real-time processors and there are post-processors. So if you've ever sat in a meeting, you can't quite figure out what to say, 20 minutes after the meeting ends, you're like, oh, that's what I wanted to say, right? How many of us have been there? And we get performance feedback that we need to be quicker on our feet. We need to be more responsive, maybe work on our extemporaneous speaking, maybe take an improv class to get better at that. Those are all good and useful things, but we're actually calling something that is a difference in wiring a weakness versus, wow, our brains work differently. So how can we design the way we work to be able to capture not just the loudest and fastest voices, but also the post-processors? This is Kahneman's working on slow and fast thinking, right? And it doesn't mean we don't have our meetings anymore. It does mean that whoever's owning the meeting might say, all right, here's where I think we're headed. Everyone sleep on it. As you post-process, share whatever comes up, in this portal, or leaving a ticket or replying all, or whatever works best for your team. And we've done that because we've planned ahead, so we actually have the night for people to sleep on the idea, but we're also normalizing post-processing versus prioritizing real-time processors. Real-time processors, the more we talk something out in the moment, the more clear the idea gets. The post-processors are like, will you shut up and let me think? I need time to cache and compile. Right? Let's design differently because we are prioritizing one way, one voice that doesn't serve us because we don't hear from the insights of people who process differently.
I think that is really, especially when we talk about facilitation in terms of like the Scrum events. So we're planning, it's hours, right? We're going to figure this out. And then we have another event, sometimes we find it. And it's really important to consider that in how people think about planning, why people change their minds. Then the notion that convergence it's not linear, right? The ways that people make decisions, and it's okay. So, Ravi, you were nodding your head a lot, very vigorously, because you're a post-processor, according to chapter 3 of this awesome book.
That reminded me of something I learned in my Myers-Briggs training, that extroverts think by talking, and introverts like me, we need silence. We think before talking. And that's where there's a clash, there's a tension in meetings and facilitation. And I think the art of giving people voice and choice is for facilitators and people with power and privilege to, first of all, be aware of this dynamic and this diversity in human beings, and how to set up the environment that harnesses the unique strengths of all in pursuit of a shared goal, which could be solving complex problems, maximizing your stock price, whatever be your shared context. It requires nuance, and so that's why I was nodding.
Yeah.
And notice that processing style is only one of many factors,
Yeah.
right? Another is in terms of wiring is, are you a morning person or are you a night owl? Or I've asked this question to enough groups that some people apparently their power hour when their thinking is finest is midday, which as a morning person, I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't understand. It's called
10
the
to
post-lunch.
2. I'm only 10 to 2. That's it.
Okay, she's one of them. Patricia's a 10 to 2er, right? But then we
No.
have time zones and we're working across geographies. And so the 9 a.m. meeting,
Mhm.
Eastern Standard Time, is not net neutral. It doesn't mean that we stop meeting, but it's that if we have the opportunity to design differently, or we realize everyone actually hates real-time conversations, we should do this asynchronously. Fantastic. Play to those strengths, reduce the barriers, because so often we're working in autopilot, right? This team has always done things. There's always been a 9 a.m. meeting on Fridays, even if everyone hates it.
Boo.
Yeah, move it to 10 o'clock. But before 2 o'clock is what I hear you saying.
No, yes. But I love that because you talk about when you talk about some of those like great techniques, tips, things to consider in the second half of the book, and how to think about that. Not only communication styles, you talk about level of directness. I think that especially for us when we're dealing with stakeholders or anybody dealing with stakeholders or with their teams, how to do that. Because we think about, in a team, who are our stakeholders? How often should we interact with them? Why? But this was a new layer for me, the level of directness, and how to kind of navigate that. So that's in the book. That was really cool. There's for the end of the book, and we're not going to talk about systems. That's a whole nother day. But you basically talk about using small experiments for people to start to build your muscles. If this isn't something that you're used to, and I had the same exact experience you did that you give in the book, Elaine, where you're like, I was in a taxi and I don't know, it was hot or something like that, something, and like I just couldn't, and I tried and it was okay. And I love that. And so it's those small things that people should try. But what other recommendations within the workplace would both of you want to leave people with who are listening today to just get started beyond getting the book?
Yeah. Ravi, I'll go first and invite you
Yes,
to
please.
add.
Yes, please.
So on the try something, right? Design a small experiment. Oftentimes it's, I want to offer something. I want to offer my perspective, but I actually don't know how to interject. And my favorite 2 ways of interjecting are, I see it differently, right? I see it differently doesn't mean you're wrong. Doesn't mean I'm telling you you're bad. It just means literally, I see it differently. So that's like the yellow flag to stop the conversation so that you can formulate the rest of your thought to add it. And how difference is treated is actually a litmus test for the health of a team. Because on some teams, on some toxic teams, difference is not okay. That's that loyalty we were talking about earlier. That's also the call to action for the leaders to normalize difference. And, oh, great, you see it differently. Another is from where I sit. From where I sit, that deadline doesn't seem possible. Right? It allows you to own the legitimacy and the limitation of your own perspective. What many of us do is because we're not omnipotent, we can't see everything, we discount our own perspectives versus saying, from where I sit, it doesn't make sense. From where I sit also naturally begs the question, what does it look like from where you sit? Because you literally sit on the other side of the country or the globe. So of course, things are going to look differently because you have a different piece of the puzzle. So I see it differently, or from where I sit, if you're looking for really practical ways to inject your voice, if that hasn't been part of your practice. The other big piece for starting are those practical decision choices for leaders of what voices am I welcoming by what I reward, right? What choices am I giving people exit, voice, loyalty? And the natural human default is to assume that other people are like us. So if we're morning people, we've already run the half marathon before everyone else wakes up. and we like 9 a.m. meetings and we like to talk things out, we tend to default to those practices unless we have the awareness that people aren't wired like us. And then we can choose our actions of let's see what actually supports the voices of the people on my team because I care about what they have to say, because openness and transparency means I need to know what they have to say, and because I can't make good decisions if I don't hear what they have to say. And so we might do some things asynchronously. We might move the meeting to 2 p.m., whatever it is. The action for me would be a design challenge to take one standing meeting that you have, analyze it through the lens of what choices, asynchronous, real-time, virtual, typing versus talking, whatever it is, video on, video off. Analyze it through all the design choices of what plays to your strengths. To the extent you don't know what makes it easier for the other people on your team to express themselves, that's a 30-second conversation that pays dividends in not having to figure out by trial and error, or for those people to feel like you don't care about them, right? And then optimize. Design differently, try it as an experiment, see what you learn, see what comes up. My money is on you actually hear more from the people that you need to hear from because you're reducing some of those barriers that you never intended to be there in the first place.
Yeah. And I like the practical statement of just, I don't see it that way from where I'm sitting, because that begs someone to be empathetic, take a pause, reflect, versus when someone goes, I don't agree, or no, which is all very good when you can be like, I don't agree, and you can explain, because somebody might just be like, well, I don't care if you agree. And that doesn't really matter, right? But the other one begs a little bit of curiosity. So that's really helpful. And all those other things are very important too. Ravi, have you finished post-processing?
So much, yeah. So much to think about. So I feel like one of the key messages or takeaways from Elaine's book is be curious, not furious. Be curious. What else might be at play here in terms of influencing voice, choice, noise, the whole spectrum? And it reminds me of some things that I learned from Ken Schwaber in the PSM class. So one of Ken's favorite quotes is ask the team. The person with power or privilege or awareness does not need to shoulder the burden of solving it. You can tap into the collective wisdom of the team and ask questions like, what might influence voice? How might it impact our shared goal of value? And how might we navigate it? So when someone is facilitating a working agreement creation for a Scrum team or a recreation, you can frame the conversation by asking these questions. And the last thing is, I love there's a part where Elaine talks about the yes and, which used to be an exercise in our PSM class. If I can say both things, I want this sprint to be successful and I'm sensing some risks. So it's not a black or white, it's not a Boolean. We are able to express multiple values, acknowledge the tension, and express it in such a way that it can create a path forward to navigate it as opposed to shutting some people down. So there are so many great tips in Elaine's book. And I think my closing suggestion would be listen to the audiobook and do what I'm going to do next, which is buy the physical book so I can underline. But those are my thoughts for those of our listeners who are trying to figure out, what do I do next?
Thank you. I'm going to ask you after we finish the podcast why you feel someone needs to listen to it first before they read it physically like I did. But I appreciate
And we
both
can
of
be
you.
different processors.
Oh, yes,
Right?
yes.
So some
yes.
people are not audiobook people. I will admit, I am not an audiobook person. I have a young child. It is too noisy. I have a really hard time listening to things because I just want peace and quiet. But give me a book. I mean, this is why the book is an ebook, hardback, large print, audio.
Yes.
So it's available in so many different ways. Thank you for offering that out there. Thank you for being here, both of you. I really enjoyed it. I hope some people try something. And if they think that they're not silenced, then maybe they'll think about who they're silencing. All right. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you.